the Vince McMahon documentary has basically stopped the world in motion, and I ain't even talking about the wrestling industry. I have people that don't even watch sports entertainment tuning into this thing because on Netflix. That's the power of that service. So given that I do have a finger of power, I thought I would give you basically my review using the ups and downs format. But before we get into it, as always, whenever we do talk about this stuff, nothing is more important than the allegations that are out there. And always remember to support victims and listen to victims. Otherwise, we can never get to the truth of the matter. All right, so of course you're going to have your opinions too. Drop them in the comments below. But otherwise, let's get into it. And I shall start with an up, because if you do break it all down like Degeneration X, it is very watchable. Now, if you're a nerd like me, there is very little information you're going to be able to get from this thing. You'll know all the ifs, buts, and maybes. You'll know all the historical events. So all you're really getting here is a bunch of talking heads going, here's my perspective. But again, if you are a casual wrestling fan, or you know nothing about professional wrestling at all, this will probably blow your mind and make you ask a lot of questions. When I say a lot of questions, I mean a lot of questions. Why wasn't that investigated? How did they get away with that? I mean, in many ways, it does kind of make you want to stop wrestling. I'm going to throw a little down in there too, because sometimes the people in question are discussing certain matters from the past. Well, it's a little bit disgusting. But it has been produced very well, so again, even if you do know every single beat, there is some worth from an entertainment value, and I'm sure you will learn a couple of new things on the way as well. So yeah, in that sense, I shall give it an up. I mean, it's a documentary on Netflix. You kind of know what to expect. In terms of those talking heads as well, do you know who is surprisingly the most interesting one? It's none other than Tony Atlas. That doesn't mean everything that comes out of his mouth is just an utter joy, although he does have some funny lines. I mean, at one point, he is talking about the fact that back in the day, women were treated terribly. And why the hell nobody followed up on that, I do not know. Like, once again, of course that's obvious when you delve into other things, but we don't press on that at all. In fact, I'm going to throw another down in there for that as well. The reason I wanted to throw Tony's name in here too is because there are a lot of guests on the Vince McMahon documentary where they're deliberately very wishy-washy, which is their right, they can do whatever the hell they want. Whereas Tony Atlas, they ask him some things and he gives you the most direct answer possible, to the point you're like, does he know he's on this thing? I guess that he does. And that is ultimately what you want from this thing. You want a subject to be brought up, and then you want to go to somebody that you do recognize, and you want them to give not their version of the truth, because that sounds like a lie, but especially the way that they would have seen it. Now, very sadly, Tony Atlas also has some terrible stories, but I guess that's just the theme of the thing. But in terms of his contributions, giving it an up. However, do not forget, you cannot take everything you see here at face value. And a lot of the commentators, well, they're completely unreliable. For example, early on in one of the episodes, Vince McMahon tells you he is nothing like the Mr. McMahon character, when the likes of John Cena and Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker and Bret Hart all say, well, no, actually, the Mr. McMahon character is just Vince McMahon turned all the way up. But then you get to the latter episodes where Vince himself says to you, well, actually, I don't know where the line is anymore, and I would say these two characters are blurred. So straight away you're like, well, you just contradicted yourself. You also have Hulk Hogan telling you that he got immunity from the federal government when it came to the WWF steroid trial, as long as he testified against Vince McMahon, when he sat on the stand and just decided not to do it, and he told his version of the truth. Now listen, I don't profess to be a smart guy. In fact, I'm a moron, but that is not how an immunity deal works. And in fact, if you had agreed to that, and then you broke it, well, your ass will probably end up in jail. When it comes to the two screw jobs as well, the Bret Hart one and the Wendy Richter one, we also leave out crucial pieces of information. I mean, you need to know all of those things, otherwise you can't make your own mind up. So again, remember, even though it is pitched and sold to you as a documentary, it's still wrestlers passing on details. So I may have just said this, I'll say it again, take it with a pinch of salt. And remember, a lot of it could be absolute gibberish, and that sends it down. This one should come as no surprise as well, because it was never going to happen. But of course, halfway through filming, the allegations against Vince McMahon do come out. And after that, well, you don't really hear a peep from anybody. And once again, I do understand this because there's a lawsuit going on, so there's only so many things you can say. But it just means we then rely on the filmmakers to kind of keep us up to date. And of course, we don't have a full stop, we don't have an ending. At the moment, there is a federal investigation going on. Until we get to the end of that, well, we just have to wait and see. It does mean that we get to two different ends of the spectrum, though. And once again, if this was all brand new information hitting you in your face, when you get to the very end credits, you're probably going to be pondering, what the flub happened after this? Once again, the truth is, we don't know. So I suppose in one sense it is a little bit like the Wrestling with Shadows documentary we did make before Montreal. We had one story we were going to tell, when a much bigger story exploded, then we tried to investigate that one instead. Obviously, too, if you do sit down to watch this, you're going to want to know what the key players think about the allegations. But yes, you are not going to hear this, because once again, it does become a legal thing. It doesn't mean it makes for a better documentary. Just down. I will say, though, that if you do want the WWE perspective on their own history, then actually the McMahon documentary serves as a good way to do it. That's kind of weird, because you're probably asking yourself, why didn't we focus more on the man here? But the truth is, Vince dedicated himself so much to World Wrestling Entertainment that their successes also kind of count as his successes too. I think it was Paul Heyman in the documentary that sums it up best. The business has its claws in Vince McMahon. It's not the other way around. But even though I did know the major beats, it was still nice to hear people talk about it, especially Vince McMahon. I mean, this is probably the most compelling you'll ever see him, especially given the allegations, because he is never going to be doing anything like this again. So, yeah, if you do want to hear him talk about a bunch of random stuff, well, now you can get it. And that's an up. A totally pointless and ridiculous down, but I'm going to give it anyway, is that Vince McMahon, for a lot of this, does sound like a frog. I have no idea what has happened to his voice, and the documentary makers actually said we had to leave 4 hours of footage on the cutting room floor because he sounded so much like the ribbity-roo animal, there is nothing we can do with it. That just makes me want to stare off into the abyss and ponder my own existence. What the flub happened? Down. There's also two specific comments that I think we do have to give a down to, and I'm actually going to hold my hands up here and say we should not be doing this, because the up and down system is meant to be fun. What Vince McMahon said here was not fun at all. The first is about everything with Rita Chatterton, which again you can read on the internet, or I suppose get some information from the documentary. But when talking about the rape allegation that did happen years and years ago, he says, well, no, it was consensual, and even if it wasn't, the statute of limitations has now passed. I can't actually comment further, because it does funny things to my stomach. That's not a good thing to say. The other one is in reference to the Owen Hart death from 1999, where Vince McMahon's justification for carrying on that pay-per-view is that the fans in the arena that night didn't pay to watch a man die, they paid for a wrestling show. Don't really understand how all these years later you can't just have a little bit more empathy or sympathy, or whatever the word would be about this. So yeah, that one too I thought was just, well, I can't think of another way to say it. It was really, really nasty. You can also give another down when it comes to episode 1, because the very first thing Vince McMahon says to you is, I'm not going to give you the good shib. In fact, I'm actively not going to give you the things that you do want to get, and you're constantly going to be guessing what I'm actually giving you. So it's like, shrug emoji straight away. What a waste of my time. I may as well go home. Now listen, I did watch all 6 episodes, and I was entertained, for lack of a better term, although I don't think entertained is the right term, but that absolutely just kills all credibility. So you got to give it a down. I will say that actually Shane McMahon is somebody that comes out the other side of this in a much better light, because you get an insight to the relationship with his father. You actually start to understand why he did some of the things that he did do. Because ultimately, this is the theme of the McMahon family, in the sense that Vince McMahon was desperate to get the adulation from Vince McMahon Sr., but he never got it. And Shane McMahon wants the same feeling from Vince McMahon. He does get it once during the documentary. That may have been the only time he got it in his entire life. So all of a sudden, if you are questioning why Shane O'Mac may go to AEW, well, this is Exhibit A. I mean, that guy must have been pulled through the ringer. I thought it was very tough to watch. But there is this wonderful moment when you see Shane McMahon and his kids before WrestleMania. All that gets it up. I'm going to give it down for the unnecessary focus on the WrestleMania 3 attendance, though. I mean, I just don't care. Because you get the likes of Vince McMahon and Hulk Hogan and Bruce Pritchard all saying it's 93,173, and then Dave Meltzer says, no, I had official documentation that said it was actually 78,000. Okay, I couldn't give a damn, and you can spin this in 2 different ways. Either we've got a bunch of wrestlers being wrestlers, or they have said this number so many times, in their brain, they just think it's accurate, and they just think it's true. And even if the number is 78,000, that is still an incredible number for WrestleMania 3. Like WWE does like 78,000 people now, and people are like, oh, Oh, it's absolutely incredible. This just takes up a huge chunk of time. And again, I'm shouting out the window, I just don't care. Talk about something else. So ultimately, I would say it's a very difficult project to try to explain because you do get into a bunch of scandals here, but you never really truly get the answers that maybe you are seeking. And again, as we've already discussed, it will leave an awful taste in your mouth. Like, how are these things ever allowed to happen to begin with? Once again, too, you also do have the big question mark about the ending of the piece, and I suppose we'll know more about that in 2025. So to wrap this up, I just want to say it again, because I think people sometimes get confused. There is nothing more important about that, and there's nothing more important than somebody who has been totally wronged than getting their justice and getting what they do deserve. Once again, too, there's also a massive question mark about these allegations that we do have to keep talking about, but I suppose we'll learn more about in 2025. But just to underline it so people do not get confused, that is the most important thing here. And of course, anybody that has been wronged and anybody that has been treated terribly, well, they deserve justice, and they deserve whatever they can get to make themselves feel better about a truly deplorable situation. I suppose that kind of draw lines under the documentary as well. You will be able to take a nice trip down memory lane, but you'll also be thinking to yourself, why does everything have to be so seedy and horrible? But I absolutely would say that it's worth the watch, and I actually binged all 6 episodes, so I was flying to Chicago, and that's like an 8-hour flight. Like I say, I did find myself being drawn into it. But if you are like me and you want to believe in the good in the world, well, yeah, it may make you hate wrestling just a little bit, but we do move on, we just keep going. Now, please do like the video, share the video, subscribe, leave a comment below, and I'll see you soon.